Evelyn Hart grabbed the reins of a bolting mule with her bare hands and did not let go, even as the leather tore her palms open and the whole freight yard screamed at her to jump clear. She didn't jump. She never jumped. That was the difference between her and every man who'd ever refused her work. If you're new here, subscribe and stay with me to the very end of this story and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far Evelyn's road has carried her. Because this road is about to get deadly. The mule came out of the chute screaming, and 11 men in the cold water freight yard scattered like quail. Not Evelyn Hart. She had been standing at the fence rail for 3 hours by then, dust in her collar, waiting for a man named Hank Cargill to look her in the eye and tell her no, like all the others had. She had a satchel at her feet with everything she owned inside it. She had $4 sewn into the hem of her skirt. And she had more than either of those things, a plain refusal to move when other people expected her to. So when the near side mule of a 6-hitch team reared up, snapped its lead, and came barreling across the packed dirt with its eyes rolled white, the men jumped the rails and Evelyn walked toward it. "Lady!" somebody hollered. "Lady, get back!" She didn't hear the rest. She was already reading the animal the way some women read scripture, close and patient and certain of what came next. The mule wasn't charging her. It was running from something, and a frightened animal running from something will run straight through anything that stands still. So she didn't stand still. She stepped into its line, lifted one hand low and open, and made a sound in her throat that wasn't a word at all, just a low, even hum, the kind her father used to make in the dark of a barn when the lightning came. The mule saw her. It planted its forelegs. It skidded, and Evelyn caught the broken lead as it whipped past her face, wrapped it once around her fist, and set her boots. The animal hauled. She held. The leather bit through the skin of her palm, and she felt it go, felt the hot, wet sting of it, and she still did not let go, because letting go was how people got killed, and how freight got wrecked, and how a woman like her got told one more time. "See, this is why." "Whoa," she said, quiet, almost gentle. "Whoa now. You're done. You're done running." The mule shuddered from nose to tail and stopped. The whole yard had gone silent. Evelyn stood there, breathing blood dripping off the heel of her hand, into the dust one loop of leather still wound around her fist, and she looked up to find every man in Coldwater staring at her like she'd walked out of a river they'd all watched her drown in. A big man came through the crowd. Older, heavy-set, a gray mustache, and a face like a man who'd been losing money all week and knew he was about to lose more. Hank Cargill. "Who tied off that lead?" Cargill said. It wasn't a question. It was a man looking for someone to fire. A younger fellow near the chute went pale. "Boss, the buckle it was." "It was rotten," Evelyn said. Cargill turned, really looked at her now. "What did you say?" "The buckle." She held out the frayed end of the lead without letting go of the mule. "It wasn't tied wrong. It was rotten clean through. You've been running tack older than your youngest hand, Mr. Cargill. That's not a hitching problem. That's a supply problem." She paused. "You've got more than one this week, I reckon." For a long moment, the only sound in the yard was the mule blowing through its nose. Cargill's jaw worked. "And how would a woman I never met know what problems I got this week?" "Because I've been standing at your fence since sunup," Evelyn said. "And I heard 3 of your drivers quit before noon." Somebody laughed, short and mean. The laugh came from a lean man leaning in the shade of the office porch, with his hat tipped down and his arms crossed, a man who'd watched the whole thing without moving a muscle, without so much as flinching when the mule came through. He straightened up slow, the way a man does when he wants everyone to watch him do it, and he came down the 2 steps into the sun. Wyatt Granger. Evelyn didn't know his name yet. She only knew the look of him, the tall, still unhurried look of a man who was used to being the one nobody argued with. Mountain freight foreman. The kind of man the West made and then couldn't quite handle. He wore no gun she could see, and he didn't need one, and he knew it. "That's a nice trick," Granger said. His voice was low and dry as the road. "Catching a spooked mule. My grandmother could catch a spooked mule." "Then hire your grandmother," Evelyn said. The yard went oh under its breath. Granger stopped walking, tipped his hat back with one finger, and looked at her. Looked at the blood on her hand, the dust on her collar, the satchel at her feet, and something in his face changed just slightly. Not softness, assessment. The look of a man recounting money in his head and coming up short. "You want work," he said. "I want to drive." "We don't hire women to drive." "You don't have men to drive," Evelyn said. "That's why your boss looks like he hasn't slept. That's why 3 of them walked off this morning. You've got a contract you can't fill, Mr. Granger. Mr. Granger, and you've got a yard full of men who won't take the run, and you've got a woman standing here who will. And you're telling me no because of the one thing about me you can't do a single thing to change." Nobody said anything. Cargill said quietly, "What run?" Granger's head turned. "Hank." "The Dever Mine Hall." Cargill went on, ignoring him, eyes still on Evelyn. "Machinery hardware and 40 barrels of blasting powder up the Coldwater grade to the Dever cut. Contract says it's there by the 14th or the whole thing's void and I lose the yard." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You know what the Coldwater grade is, miss?" "I know it's a road," Evelyn said. "And I've never met a road I couldn't drive. It's killed 4 men this year." "Then it's killed 4 men who did something wrong." She finally gently let the lead slide from her bleeding hand into the grip of the pale young driver who took it like she'd handed him something holy. "I don't intend to do anything wrong." Granger stepped in close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his eyes, and she held them. "You ever drive powder?" he asked, quiet so the yard couldn't hear. "You ever drive 40 barrels of black powder up a grade so steep the mule's hind feet slip out from under him in July when the heat's got the whole load sweating and one hard jolt turns you into a red cloud over the canyon? You ever done that, ma'am?" "No," Evelyn said. "Then you got no business." "Have you?" she said. His mouth shut. "Have any of them—" She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "Because from where I stood at that fence all morning, Mr. Granger, it sounded to me like the men who have done it are the 3 who quit. So don't tell me about business I got no part in. Every one of us is standing at the start of a road nobody in this yard has driven and lived. The only difference between me and your men is they're afraid to say it out loud." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Cargill broke it. "What's your name?" "Evelyn Hart." "Hart." He frowned the way men frowned when a name snagged on something. "There was a Tom Hart drove for the Sutter line, down south of here, killed on a river crossing 4 years back. Freight went in, took him with it. You any relation?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was perfectly level, and only a woman who'd spent 4 years learning to keep it that way would have heard what it cost her. "He was going to be my husband," she said. The whole yard heard it. Some of the men looked at their boots. Even Granger looked away for a half a second, and then made himself look back, because he was the kind of man who didn't let himself flinch twice. "I was on the far bank," Evelyn went on, and now she was talking to nobody, or to all of them, or to the 4 years themselves. "I'd already crossed. I'd told him the water was too high. I told him wait. And he didn't wait because he was behind on the contract, and there was a man like you." She looked at Cargill not unkindly, waiting on the machinery, and Tom Hart never in his life made a woman wait on his account, not even the water. She paused. "So he went, and the current took the near wheel and the wagon rolled, and I stood on that bank and watched the man I loved go under with a full load of somebody else's cargo, and there was not one single thing I could do about it." She looked back at Granger. "I've thought about that crossing every day for 4 years, she said. "Every day. I've driven it in my head 1,000 times the right way, the way that would have saved him. I know exactly where he went wrong. I know it better than any man alive because I paid for it." Her voice didn't break. It went quieter, which was worse. "So when you ask me, have I ever driven something deadly, Mr. Granger? No, not the way you mean. But I have stood on a bank and watched what happens to the ones who take a road they don't respect. And I promise you, there is not a man in this yard who respects a bad road more than I do. Jeti. Chaptupa. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then a voice came from over by the water trough, smooth, amused, and cold underneath. Well, that's a real pretty speech. The man who'd said it pushed off the trough and sauntered over, thumbs hooked in his belt. He was younger than Granger, handsome, in a hard way, with a grin that never reached his eyes. Cole Maddox, the best driver Cargill had left, and the kind of man who knew it and made sure everybody else knew it too. But that's all it is, ain't it? Maddox said. A speech. You know what happened to your man on a river crossing 4 years ago, sure. And I'm real sorry for your loss, ma'am. I truly am. The grin flexed. But knowing where a dead man went wrong ain't the same as knowing how to drive a live team up the worst grade in the territory. My daddy could tell you every mistake ever got a man killed on a horse. Never made him a rider. You're right, Evelyn said. Maddox blinked. He'd expected a fight. Talk isn't driving, she agreed. So stop asking me to talk. Put me on a seat and watch me drive, and then you'll know. That's all I've been asking for since sunup. Not a speech, a wagon. Maddox's grin thinned. He looked at Cargill. Boss, you're not seriously... Shut up, Cole. Cargill said tiredly. She'll wreck the load. She'll wreck it, and we'll all be out. I said shut up. Cargill dragged a hand down his face. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He looked like a man watching the last of everything he'd built come apart in the July heat and reaching for the only rope left, no matter whose hand it was tied to. Granger. Granger didn't answer. Granger, I asked you a question. You didn't ask me anything yet, Hank. I'm asking now, can she do it? And here Wyatt Granger did the thing that Evelyn would remember longer than anything else that happened that day. He didn't answer fast. He didn't do her the disrespect of a fast answer. He looked at her, really looked the whole of her, the torn hand, and the leveled voice, and the 4 years standing behind her eyes, and he took his time, the way he took his time with everything that mattered. I don't know, he said finally. Maddox snorted. I don't know, Granger said again louder, and the snort died. Nobody knows. That's the honest answer, and I'll give it because she gave one. I've watched 100 men swear they could drive that grade, and I've buried a fair number of them. Swearing don't mean a thing to me. Nay. He turned to Cargill. But I'll tell you what I did see, Hank. I saw a spooked mule come across this yard full tilt, and I saw 11 men jump the fence, and I saw one person walk toward it. And in 19 years of freight, I have never once seen the wrong kind of driver do that. The yard went still again. The wrong kind of driver runs from the animal, Granger said. Every time, it's the first thing that gets a man killed on a bad road. He flinches when the load starts to go, and the flinch is what kills him. He looked at Evelyn. She didn't flinch. Evelyn held his gaze. No, she said. I didn't. Might get you killed just the same, Granger said. Might, she agreed. But it won't get your load killed, and that's what your boss is paying for. Something crossed Granger's face then, not quite a smile, because he wasn't a smiling man, but the ghost of the place. A smile would go. Cargill made his decision the way drowning men make decisions, all at once. You're hired, he said, provisional. You drive the lead wagon on the Deaver haul, you follow Granger's word like it came down off a mountain, and if you get my powder to that mine by the 14th, we'll talk about a real wage. He jabbed a finger at her. But if you wreck my load, Miss Hart, I am ruined. You understand me, ruined. I got no second wagon, no second contract, and no more chances. You will be driving the last thing I own up a road that kills people. That is what I am handing you. You still want it? Yes, Evelyn said without a breath of hesitation. Then God help us both. Cargill turned to go, then stopped. Granger, she's your responsibility. She lives, she drives, she wrecks. It's on you. You wanted to run this yard your way. Well, here's your way. And he walked off toward the office like a man walking toward a hanging. which left Evelyn standing in the middle of the yard, with a bleeding hand, a hired seat, and Wyatt Granger looking at her like she was a problem he'd just been handed the deed to. "You heard him," Granger said. "You do what I say." "When you're right," Evelyn said. "Always. When you're right," she repeated, calm as still water. "You put me on this seat because I don't flinch, Mr. Granger. A woman who does everything a man tells her is a woman who flinches on command. You don't want that driver. You just think you do." She bent, picked up her satchel, and slung it over her shoulder with the hand that wasn't bleeding. "Where's my wagon?" Granger stared at her. Then slowly he shook his head, not in refusal, in something closer to disbelief or recognition. "Third barn," he said. "The tall lead hitch, 8 mules." He watched her turn toward it. "Miss Hart?" She stopped. "That grade's gonna test you in ways a river never did," he said. "A river kills you quick. That grade kills you slow. It gives you 100 little chances to make the one mistake, and it waits, and it's patient, and it don't care how much you respect it. You understand? Respect ain't enough up there. You got to be better than the road every foot of it for 2 days straight in July, and the first time you're only as good as the road." He didn't finish. Evelyn looked at him a long moment. "My fiancé was as good as that river," she said. "For 4 years I've been becoming better than it. That's the only thing I've done with my life since. So I reckon I'll manage a road." She hitched the satchel higher. "But I'll thank you for the warning, Mr. Granger. Most men in this yard would have let me find out the hard way just to watch." And she walked to the third barn to meet her mules, leaving Wyatt Granger standing in the sun, watching her go with the strangest feeling in his chest that he had just made either the best decision of his life or the last one. The mules in the third barn were a mismatched, sullen, half-broke lot, and Evelyn loved them on sight. She loved them the way you love anything nobody else believes in. There were 8 of them, and the 2-wheelers were solid enough, but the swing pair was nervous, and the leaders were a matched set of young jacks that somebody had ruined with too much whip and not enough sense. They laid their ears back when she came down the aisle. The near leader, a rangy iron-gray animal with a scar across its muzzle, showed her its teeth. "I know," Evelyn told it softly. "I know. Somebody hurt you and told you it was your fault. I know all about it." She spent an hour with them before she touched the harness. Just being there. Just letting them learn the sound of her, the smell of her, the fact that her hands didn't come at them fast. She talked to them the whole time, low and steady, the same tone she'd used on the bolting mule, and by the end of the hour, the gray leader had stopped showing its teeth and had started cautiously to lip at her sleeve. That was where Cole Maddox found her. He came into the barn quiet and stood at the end of the aisle, watching her work, and let her feel him there a while before he spoke. "They gave you the reject team," he said. "You know that, right? Them's the animals nobody else'll drive. Boss keeps 'em because he's too cheap to sell 'em at a loss." He smiled. "Real vote of confidence putting you on the powder wagon with 8 mules half of us wouldn't hitch to an empty cart." "I know," Evelyn said. She didn't turn around. "You know." Maddox laughed. "You don't know the half of it, ma'am. You don't know this territory, you don't know this crew, and you sure as hell don't know that grade. You caught a lucky mule in the yard and made a pretty speech about your dead man, and now everybody's acting like you hung the moon." He came a few steps closer. "But I've driven that road 11 times. I've buried 2 friends off the Coldwater grade, and I am telling you, woman, to—" He caught himself. "Driver to driver. You are going to get somebody killed. Maybe you. Maybe worse, one of us trying to pull your load out of a ditch when you lose it, and I won't have it." Evelyn finished checking the gray leader's off hoof, set it down gently straightened, and turned to face him. "You've buried 2 friends off that road," she said. "That's right. Then I'm sorry for that. I mean it." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "But let me ask you something, Mr. Maddox. Those 2 friends, were they good drivers?" Maddox's smile flickered. "Best I ever knew. Better than you." A pause. "One of 'em. So the best driver you ever knew took that road," Evelyn said, "and the road killed him anyway, and you've decided the reason is skill, that if a person's just good enough, the grade lets them by. She shook her head slowly. That's the lie that's going to kill you, Mr. Maddox. It's not skill that survives that road. It's judgment, knowing when to go and when to wait. Your friend didn't die because he wasn't good enough. He died because somewhere up there, on some hot afternoon with a contract breathing down his neck, he decided to go when he should have waited. She held his eyes, same as my Tom did, and I will bet you every dollar I own that there was a man like Cargill at the far end tapping his watch, telling him to hurry. Maddox's jaw tightened. Something had landed. She could see it land. You don't know that, he said. No, Evelyn agreed. I don't. But I know it in my man, and I've made a study of it, and I'd wager it holds for yours. And I'll tell you the one thing I know for certain about myself, Mr. Maddox, that I don't know about a single other soul in this yard. She stepped past him toward the harness rack and paused at his shoulder. There is no contract on this earth, and no man that will ever make me hurry a bad crossing again. Not one. I already paid that price once. Nobody's ever getting me to pay it twice. She lifted the harness down. That's why I'll get your boss's powder to that mine. Not because I'm the best driver in this barn. Because I'm the one who will never ever be in a hurry to die. She carried the harness to the gray leader and began gently to dress it out. Behind her, Cole Maddox stood a long time without speaking. Then he said quietly, and it didn't sound like a threat, though it was one, "We'll see." And he walked out. Granger came at dusk to check her rig. He didn't announce it. He just appeared at the tail of the wagon while she was checking the last of the powder barrels, running his hand along the chocks and the brake shoe and the trace chains. Without a word, the way a man inspects work, he expects to find wrong. He didn't find it wrong. He checked the brake. She'd wedged a second shoe against the rear wheel, a thing no other driver in the yard bothered to do. He checked the load. She'd shifted the heaviest barrels forward and low, dead over the axle, and lashed them in a pattern he'd only ever seen one old teamster use, a man 40 years dead, who'd taught it to Granger himself when Granger was a boy. "Where'd you learn that lashing?" Granger said. "My father." "Your father, a teamster. My father drove freight in the Sierras for 30 years and never lost a load." Evelyn tied off the last knot. "He taught me before he taught my brothers because I was the one who paid attention. He used to say," and here her voice softened just slightly, "Evie, a man ties a load so it don't come off. A good driver ties it so that if the wagon comes off, the load stays put, and you can rebuild around it. I never understood that till I watched a wagon go into a river with a man tied to his seat." She pulled the knot tight. "Now I understand it fine." Granger was quiet a moment. "Your father's still living?" "No." "River?" "His heart. In his bed. Old." A pause. "He was the only one who ever thought a woman ought to hold the reins." Another pause. "There's been nobody since. Not till today." Granger looked at her across the tail of the wagon in the last of the light, and Evelyn looked back, and neither of them said the thing that was sitting in the air between them, which was that today wasn't about him thinking a woman ought to hold the reins. Today was about him being out of choices. She knew the difference. She'd made him say it out loud in front of the whole yard on purpose. "I didn't hire you because I think a woman ought to drive," Granger said, as if he'd heard the thought. "I know," Evelyn said. "You hired me because you're desperate and I don't flinch. I never once mistook it for anything else, Mr. Granger. I'd have to be a fool, and I'm not a fool. I'm a widow with $4 sewn in her skirt and one last yard in the whole territory that didn't turn her out at the gate." She tied off the tarp. "You didn't do me a kindness today. You did yourself one, and it happened to fall on me, and I'll take it. Because a woman like me learns to take what falls where it falls." She met his eyes. "But don't you dress it up. I've had enough men dress things up. My whole life's been men dressing up no to look like not yet, and I can't to look like it's for your own good. You told me the plain truth in front of the yard that you don't know if I can do it." That's the first honest thing a man said to me about my own work in 4 years. So don't go soft on me now. Keep telling me the truth. That's all I want from you. The truth and a road. Wyatt Granger stood there in the dark, a foreman who'd faced down striking crews and killer grades, and men twice his size, and he found to his own private astonishment that he did not have one word to say back to her. So he said the only thing that was true. "We roll at 4, he said. "Before the heat. You be on that seat with the team hitched and the load checked by 3:30, or I roll without you and Cargill loses his yard and it's your name on it." "I'll be on the seat by 3, Evelyn said. "1/2 is fine." "I'll be on it by 3, she said again. "I want an hour with the team before we roll. They don't know me yet. They will by 4. And she went back to her mules in the dark, alone, talking low to the scarred gray leader that nobody else in the yard would drive. And Wyatt Granger walked back to the office, not thinking for the first time in a long while about the contract, or the grade, or the money at all. He was thinking about a woman standing on a riverbank 4 years gone, watching the water take everything, and driving that crossing right in her head every single day since 10,000 times, until being better than a killing road wasn't a skill she'd learned, but the only shape her grief had left to take. He'd buried men who drove for glory, men who drove for money, men who drove to prove something to a father, a town, a girl. He had never in 19 years hired a driver who drove for penance. And somewhere in his hard, careful, unhurried heart, Wyatt Granger understood, though he'd have died before he said it out loud that night, that penance might be the only thing on God's earth strong enough to get 40 barrels of black powder up the Coldwater grade alive. The yard went dark. The mules settled, and in the third barn, a woman. The whole territory had turned away, sat on an upturned bucket in the straw, holding the muzzle of a ruined gray mule against her chest, and told it very softly in a voice nobody else would ever hear. "We're gonna be all right, you and me. Everybody said no to both of us, and tomorrow we're gonna drive up a road that kills people, and we're gonna live, and we're gonna make every last one of them wrong." She pressed her forehead to the animal's scarred face. "You just do what I say when I say it. And I'll never once ask you to hurry into water. I promise you that. I promise you that." Outside, the stars came out over Coldwater, and the 14th was 5 days away. She was on the seat by 3, just like she said. Granger found her there in the dark rains, already gathered the 8 mules, standing hitched and quiet, in a way they had never once stood quiet for Cole Maddox. He walked the length of the team with his lantern low, and didn't find a single strap out of place. The scarred gray leader turned its head to watch him pass, and didn't lay its ears back. "They know you," Granger said. It came out sounding almost like an accusation. "They're starting to." "In one night." "In one night I didn't hit them," Evelyn said. "That's most of it, Mr. Granger. You'd be surprised how far a body gets in this world just by not hitting the thing that's afraid of you." He said nothing to that. He swung up onto his own horse, lifted his hand, and the freight train rolled out of Coldwater in the last cool dark before dawn. 5 wagons, Evelyn's powder wagon, second in the line, Maddox running lead, and the sun not yet a rumor on the hills. For 2 hours, nothing happened, and that was the worst 2 hours of the whole run. Because in 2 quiet hours, a person has time to think, and Evelyn Hart had spent 4 years learning what her own mind did to her when it had time to think. It took her back to the water. Every time. She sat on that jolting seat with the reins light in her ruined hands, and she felt the river come up under her like it always did, cold and brown and patient, and she heard Tom's voice. "It'll hold, Evie. It's held higher than this," and she made herself breathe and count the mules and come back. 8, she said under her breath. Gray and Bay, and the 2 Browns, and the Wheelers. Naming them. Bringing herself back to the road she was on, and off the one that had already drowned. 8 mules and a live man on a horse, and a road that hasn't killed anybody today. The live man on the horse dropped back alongside her about then, as if he'd heard her. "You talk to yourself," Granger said. "I talked to the mules." "You were talking to yourself," Evelyn kept her eyes on the team. My father used to say the quiet stretches are what kill you, not the hard ones. On a hard stretch, a driver's awake. It's the easy miles where the mind wanders off and the hands go soft and the load starts to shift a quarter inch at a time and nobody notices till it's a foot. She flexed her fingers on the lines. So I keep my mind on the road, out loud if I have to. You can tell the men I'm crazy. I've been called worse this week. Granger almost smiled. They're already telling each other you're crazy. You don't need my help. Then we're all agreed. He rode beside her a while in silence, and it was a different silence than the one in the yard. That one had been a fence. This one was just two people not needing to fill the air. Then the sun came up, and the heat came with it, and the cold water grade began. It started gentle. That was the trap of it, and Evelyn knew it was the trap, even as the road tilted up under her and the mules leaned into the collars. A gentle grade fools a man into keeping his speed. Then the gentle grade steepens by a degree, and a degree more so slow, you never feel the moment it turns. And by the time you understand you're on the killing part of the road, your team is already blowing, and your brake is already hot, and you've got no speed left to spend. Maddox took it fast. She watched his wagon pull ahead up the first long pull dust boiling off his wheels, and she heard him whoop at his team driving them hard into the grade to bank momentum for the steeper pitch above. "He's going too fast," Evelyn said. Granger, riding on her offside, said nothing. "He's spending his mules on the easy part," she said. "He'll have nothing left when it stands up. Cole's driven this 11 times. Then Cole's been lucky 11 times. She held her own team back to a walk to Maddox's open contempt and let the gap between them stretch. Behind her, the third wagon crowded her tail, its driver leaning out to holler. "Move it up, lady, you're choking the whole line." "Let him choke," Evelyn said to nobody to the gray. "Walk, walk, we're not racing anybody up this hill." The grade stood up. It happened just where she'd known it would, a mile on where the road bent around a shoulder of rock and reared back so sharp the mule's hind feet started slipping on the loose stone. And that was where Cole Maddox's spent team quit. She heard it before she saw it. A driver's shout that started angry and turned to something else halfway through. Then the line ahead stopped dead, and Evelyn stood up on her footboard and saw it. Maddox's wagon stalled on the steepest pitch, his mules blown their sides heaving, refusing the collar, and the whole loaded wagon starting slowly, terribly to roll backward down the grade toward hers. "Brake!" somebody screamed. "Cole, your brake!" Everything happened fast then, and Evelyn Hart did not hurry. That was the thing about her that Granger would tell men about for years afterward, and none of them would understand it. 1,200 pounds of wagon and load were rolling backward down a killing grade straight at her powder, and she did not hurry. She sat down. She set her own brake. She spoke to her mules in that low, even voice, 3 words, hold, 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 and 8 animals that trusted her leaned back into their britchen and locked the wagon still as a stone. And then, with Maddox's wagon sliding toward her and men screaming and dust everywhere, she did the one thing nobody else on that road would have thought to do. She turned her leaders. She gigged the gray hard to the left off the road up the raw, broken slope of the shoulder itself, and drove her whole team and her whole load of black powder off the killing line of Maddox's runaway and up onto ground. No wagon was meant to climb 2 feet, 3 feet just far enough that when Maddox's wagon slid past, where hers had been, it slid past empty road and slammed sideways into the rock bank instead of into 40 barrels of powder. The crash was enormous. Maddox's load went over. Freight burst across the road. His mules screamed and tangled and one went down. But nothing exploded. Nobody died. And Evelyn Hart sat her team dead still on the side of a mountain at an angle that should have rolled her holding 8 frightened mules and a wagon of powder in place with nothing but her voice and her britchen and her hands. And she waited for the dust to settle before she said one word. Granger reached her first. He came off his horse before it stopped, and he was up the slope and at her wheel with his face gone white under the tan. "Are you—" He couldn't finish it. "Is the load—" "The load's fine," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands, when she lifted them off the lines, shook. She looked at them like they belonged to somebody else, and then she folded them in her lap so he wouldn't see. "The load's fine, Mr. Granger. Go see to your man. His mule's down, and he's going to do something stupid trying to get it up, and somebody with sense needs to be standing there when he does." Granger looked up at her, at this woman who had just driven a powder wagon off the road and up a mountainside to save every man on it, and whose only word about it was to send him to help the fool who'd nearly killed them all. "You saved his load," Granger said quietly. "The man who's been telling everybody you'd get us killed. You just saved his life and his freight." "I saved your contract," Evelyn said. "His life came free with it." She nodded down the slope. "Go on. His mule's panicking." Cole Maddox was in fact doing something stupid. His lead mule had gone down in the tangle and was thrashing on its side, half choked in twisted harness, and Maddox was in there with it, hauling on the traces, cursing, trying to drag 600 pounds of terrified animal up by main strength, while its hooves scythed the air an inch from his skull. Two other drivers stood back, not fool enough to get in there, not brave enough to stop him. Cole, get out of there. Get up, you," Maddox hauled. The mule screamed and kicked, and he barely got his leg clear. "Get up. Let it choke down first." The voice was Evelyn's. She'd come down off her wagon and down the slope, and she stepped into the wreck of Maddox's freight, without one instant's hesitation, straight toward the thrashing animal, and Maddox turned on her with his face red and streaming. "Get away from my team." "It can't get up because you've got the trace pinned under the box," Evelyn said, already down on her knees in the dirt by the animal's neck. "You're hauling against your own weight, Mr. Maddox. You'll strangle it before you lift it. Give me your knife." "I don't need your—" "Give me your knife or watch your mule die." She said it flat without heat, and it landed harder than a shout. "You want to hate me at the top of the grade. Right now this animal has about a minute of air left, and I am the only one down here who knows why. Knife!" For one long, furious second, Maddox stared at her. Then he put the knife in her hand. She went in low along the mule's neck, quick and sure, talking to the animal the whole time in that low hum, the same sound she'd made in the yard, the same sound she made to the gray in the barn. And she cut one strap, then a second, freeing the pinned trace, and the instant the pressure came off its throat, the mule stopped fighting. Just stopped, blew a great rattling breath, and Evelyn got a hand on its headstall and said, "Up now, easy up." And the animal that had been killing itself for 10 minutes heaved once and stood. Nobody said anything. Maddox stood in the wreck of his own load with his chest heaving and his knife in a woman's hand, and every driver on the grade watching, and Evelyn wiped the blade clean on her skirt and held it out to him handle first. "Your leaders were blown before the pitch," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "You spent them on the flat. I'm not saying it to shame you. I'm saying it because you're going to drive this road again, and I don't want to cut you out of your harness next time, because next time it might be your neck under the box instead of the mule's." She pressed the knife into his hand. "Walk them up the steep parts. Save their wind for where the road stands up. That's all. That's the whole secret." She turned to go. "There isn't one you don't already know. You just drive like a man who's got something to prove, and a man with something to prove always goes too fast." She walked back up the slope to her own team, and Cole Maddox stood there holding his knife, watching her go, and for the first time all day, he did not have one word to say. They lost 2 hours riding Maddox's wagon and repacking his freight, and the whole time the sun climbed and the heat built, and Granger stood in the road doing the arithmetic. Every foreman does the arithmetic of miles against days, and not liking the answer. He drew Evelyn aside while the men worked. "We're behind," he said. 2 hours here. We'll lose more. That wreck cost us, and the heat's going to slow the teams this afternoon worse than usual." He looked at her. "I need to make it up. Which means either we drive into the dark, which I don't like on this road, or we take the cutoff at Salt Fork tomorrow and save half a day." Evelyn went very still. "Salt Fork," she said. "It's a river crossing." He watched her face. "I know what you're going to say. But it's low this time of year, ankle deep most Julys. It'd save us the whole loop around the trestle and put us back on schedule. A pause. I wanted to tell you now, not spring it on you at the bank. I figured after 4 years you'd rather know a river was coming than come around a bend and find one. And that small thing, that plain human decency of a hard man, giving a grieving woman warning of the exact thing that had broken her life, did something to Evelyn Hart that no kindness had done in 4 years. Her throat closed. She had to look away at the mules a moment before she trusted her voice. "Thank you," she said finally, "for telling me. You can say no. We'll take the long way. It's your load. It's Cargill's load, and his yard, and his life savings." She wiped her mouth. "No, if it's low, we cross. I'm not going to sink a man's whole future in the mud because I'm afraid of water. I'll look at it when we get there. I'll read it myself. And if I say it's safe, we cross. And if I say it's not, we take the trestle and lose the day. And that one you follow my word, Mr. Granger, because there is not a soul alive who reads a river like a woman who's watched one take everything she loved." She looked at him. "That's the one place on this earth where I am better than you. Rivers. You give me the rivers, and I'll give you every other foot of this road. Deal." Granger looked at her a long moment. "Deal," he said. They drove into the dark after all, because the afternoon heat blew a hot wind up the canyon that dropped the mule's pace to a crawl, and Evelyn's arithmetic and Granger's came to the same place, cross Salt Fork at dawn, or lose the contract. So they pushed the last hard miles by lantern to a flat above the crossing, and made a cold camp, and the men fell into their bedrolls too tired to talk. Not Maddox. He waited until the others were down, and then he came and crouched at the edge of the low fire, where Evelyn sat working oil into her cracked reins, and for a while he didn't say anything. "You cut my strap clean," he said finally. "In under a minute, in the dark near enough, off a thrashing mule." He turned a stick in the coals. "My daddy couldn't have done that, and my daddy was the best teamster in 3 counties. Your daddy taught you the whip work. Everything I know." A silence. "He died on this road. That's the 2 friends I told you about. One of them was him. Off the Salt Fork crossing, matter-of-fact high water spring of 78. I was 17. I was on the far bank." He didn't look up. "I told him it was too high. He didn't wait." Evelyn's hands went still on the reins. The fire popped. "You were on the far bank," she said very quietly. "Yeah." "And you told him to wait?" "Yeah." "And he didn't?" "No," Maddox said. "He didn't." And then he understood what she was doing, why she'd gone so still, and his head came up, and the 2 of them looked at each other across a dying fire on a mountain. A widow and an orphan, both of whom had stood on a far bank and screamed, "Wait," at a man they loved, and watched the water take him anyway. And neither one of them said another word because there wasn't another word that needed saying. There was just the fire, and the same wound in 2 different chests, and a long, terrible healing quiet. Maddox stood up first. "I still don't think you should be out here," he said, but it came out different now. Not cruel, almost gentle. "But I don't think it because you're a woman. I take that part back. I think it because there's not a soul in the world I'd wish this road on, and I already watched it eat the best man I knew." He looked down at her. "That's all. Get some sleep. It's a bad crossing at dawn, even when the water's low." He walked off to his bedroll, and Evelyn Hart sat alone by the coals with the oil rag forgotten in her hands, and understood for the first time in 4 years that she had never once been the only one standing on that bank, that every river in the West had a far bank, and every far bank had somebody on it screaming, "Wade into water," that wouldn't listen. That grief like hers wasn't a lonely country after all. It was the most crowded country in the world, and she'd just been too locked inside her own to look up and see all the others standing in it. She slept better that night than she had in 4 years. She didn't dream of the water at all. Salt Fork at dawn was not low. Granger knew it the moment they came over the last rise and saw it, and his stomach dropped because he'd promised her ankle deep, and what lay below them was a brown, muscled, moving thing swollen with snowmelt from a late high country thaw running fast and loud between its banks. "That's not low," he said. "No," Evelyn said. "It's not." She'd already stopped her team on the flat above the bank. She sat looking down at the water with a stillness that had nothing restful in it. Somebody's dam let go upstream, or the thaw came late up high. That's 1.5 feet of fast water minimum, maybe 2. She wrapped her lines and set her brake. "Hold the team. I'm going to walk it." "Walk it." "Evelyn, I'm going to walk it, Mr. Granger." She was already climbing down. "You gave me the rivers. This is me taking them. Nobody crosses until I've read every foot of that bottom with my own 2 feet. And if that costs us the contract, it costs us the contract, because I will lose Hank Cargill's yard before I will put 1 mule in water I haven't measured." She looked up at him. "You promised. The rivers are mine." Granger held her eyes. Every instinct he had, the foreman's instinct, the contract, the schedule, all of it screamed to argue. "They're yours," he said, and he watched her walk down to the water alone. She waded in at the shallow ford, and the current hit her at the knees hard enough that she had to set her stance, and the men on the bank went quiet, watching a woman walk out into a river that had a foot of pull to it and getting stronger toward the middle. She went slow. She read the bottom with her boots, the way she read a mule, with her hands feeling for the drop-offs, the loose gravel, the smooth stone that would slide a wheel. She went out to where the water climbed her thighs and stopped, and stood a long moment feeling the whole river move against her. Then she came back. "We can cross," she said, and the men let out a breath. "But not here, not at the ford. The ford's got a soft bottom on the far third where the currents undercut it, and a loaded wagon'll drop a wheel in it sure as sunrise." She was already pointing. "There's a gravel bar 40 yards up. It's a longer wade, and the water runs faster over it, but the bottom's hard the whole way, and it shelves even. We cross there 1 wagon at a time. Empty mule teams walked over first to break the current and steady the crossing, then the loads. Wheelers get extra chain, and nobody." She turned and looked at every man on the bank, and last of all at Maddox. "Nobody crosses out of turn. Nobody crowds the wagon ahead. You wait for the man in front of you to be up the far bank and clear before your lead mule touches water. Because if 2 wagons are in that river at once and one goes wrong, they both go, and everybody in them goes with it." Her eyes stopped on Maddox. Everybody agreed. "Agreed," said the drivers. Maddox looked at the water a long time, at the far bank, at the fast brown pull of it, the same as the water that had taken his father 12 years gone. "Agreed," he said, and meant it. She crossed her own wagon first. She wouldn't send another driver into a river she hadn't crossed herself, so she walked her spare mules over to break the current, brought them back, chained her wheelers, took a breath, and drove her powder into the Salt Fork. It was the longest 90 seconds of Wyatt Granger's life. He sat his horse on the bank and watched a woman drive 40 barrels of black powder into fast water on a gravel bar 40 yards off the ford. And he watched her read that river. Foot by foot, holding her leaders to a line only she could see. And when the current caught the wagon box and shoved it, and the whole rig slewed a foot downstream, he watched her, not panic, watched her let the mules feel the water and lean into it and pull true. Watched her bring 1,200 pounds of death across a river that had killed her whole life once, and up the far bank and onto dry ground without spilling 1 cup of water into 1 barrel. She stopped on the far side, set her brake, sat there a second with her back to all of them. Only Granger was close enough later when he crossed to know that she had been crying. Silently, without a sound, the whole way across. Crying and driving, and not once letting the one interfere with the other. He never told a soul. They ran the whole train across the gravel bar, 1 wagon at a time, and Evelyn stood in the middle of the river the entire time, out in the current up to her thighs at the downstream edge of the crossing line, so that every driver coming over had her there as a mark to steer by and a body to fear drifting into. 4 wagons crossed clean. She called each one over herself, reading the water as it changed, moving her mark upstream as the current shifted, and 4 times a wagon came up the far bank safe, and 4 times a driver looked back at the woman standing in the river and tipped his hat to her without a word. Maddox came last, and Maddox, who had watched his father die on a crossing exactly like this one, who had spent 12 years, never once volunteering to cross a river first or last or at all, drove his team down to the water and stopped and looked at Evelyn standing out there in the brown pull of it, and something crossed his face that no one else could read. "You don't have to stand in it for me," he called out. "I know the line. You showed us all the line." "I stand in it for everybody," Evelyn called back. "Come on across, Mr. Maddox, slow. Let your mules feel it. I've got your mark." And he came. He came slow, the way she'd taught him on the grade, letting his team feel the water, instead of fighting it, his eyes on the woman standing downstream of him like a fixed star. And when his wagon hit the fast center and shoved downstream toward her, she didn't move out of the way. She held her ground in the current, a body's width off his wheel, so he'd have something solid to steer against. And he steered against it, and his mules found the hard bottom, and he came up the far bank clean and dry with the last load of Hank Cargill's future safe behind him. He stopped at the top. He didn't get down. He just sat there, looking back at the river. Evelyn waded out of the Salt Fork for the last time, soaked to the waist, and Cole Maddox looked down at her from his high seat. "My father drowned 40 yards downstream of here," he said. "I never crossed this river since. 12 years. I've took the trestle every time and told everybody it was faster." His jaw worked. "You just stood in it, the whole time, for all of us. In the exact water that—" He stopped. Couldn't finish. Didn't need to. "I know," Evelyn said gently. "Yeah." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and it wasn't river water. "Yeah, I reckon you do. I reckon you're about the only one who does." And Cole Maddox, who 3 days ago had crouched in a barn and told her she'd get somebody killed, took off his hat to a woman standing wet and shaking on a riverbank and held it against his chest, and said the truest thing he'd ever said to anybody. "I was wrong about you, ma'am. I was wrong, clear down to the bone. And I'll say it in front of the whole crew and Cargill, too, and any man that wants to argue, it can argue it with me." They made camp early on the far side to dry out back on schedule the Salt Fork behind them, and something had changed in the crew that no man could have named, but every man could feel. The way they looked at her had changed. It wasn't that they'd decided a woman could drive freight. It was smaller than that, and bigger than that. It was that they'd watched her stand in the exact river that had broken her for hour after hour, so that not one of them would go under. And a person who'll do that isn't a man or a woman anymore. A person who'll do that is just the one you follow. Granger came and sat by her while she wrung out her skirt near the fire. "I promised you low water," he said. "I broke that promise. Could have killed you. You didn't know. I should have." Wyatt. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it stopped him flat. She hadn't planned to. It just came out the way the truest things do. "You gave me the river, and you kept your word when I asked for it. You stood on that bank and let me walk into water that scared the life out of you, and you didn't say one word to stop me because you'd promised. And a man who keeps a promise like that when it's tearing him up is a rarer thing than a woman who can drive." She wrung the last of the water out and laid the skirt on a rock. "So don't apologize to me. Nobody's kept a promise to me in 4 years. You keeping that one is worth more than the low water you promised. A lot more." Granger sat there in the firelight, this hard, unhurried, careful man, and he found he could not look at her, and he did not know why, except that he did know why, and it scared him worse than the river had. "We'll make the mine by the 14th now," he said, because it was safe and true. "You bought us that today, all of it. We'll make it if the road lets us. It'll let us. Worst of it's behind us. Salt Fork was the worst of it." And Evelyn Hart, who had spent 4 years learning that the water always saves its worst. "For the moment, you decide the worst is behind you," said nothing at all. She looked into the fire and pulled her wet knees up under her chin and let the man believe it because he'd earned an easy night. But she watched the dark road up ahead where it climbed toward the Deaver Cut, and she thought about 40 barrels of powder and a broken bridge Cargill had mentioned once and never explained, and a man named Cole Maddox who had 2 friends buried off this road, and had told her the second one's name, but never the first. And somewhere down in the part of her that had stood on a riverbank and learned to read what was coming, a small cold voice said very quietly that the worst of this road was not behind them at all. She kept that to herself. She let the crew sleep easy on the far side of the Salt Fork dry and safe and back on schedule, and she took the first watch alone, sitting by the low fire with her dry reins across her knees and the scarred gray mule dozing at her shoulder, keeping her eyes on the dark road up ahead, where the mountain waited patient. The way killing roads always waited for the exact moment a person let themselves believe they'd already survived the worst of it. The cold voice was right. It started with a rider. He came down the mountain road toward them near midday, a lone horseman pushing his animal hard, and he didn't look like a man bringing good news. Men bringing good news don't lather a horse in July heat. Granger held up a fist, and the train stopped and the rider pulled up in a spray of grit and sat there blowing nearly as hard as his horse. "You Cargill's train," he panted. "The Daver powder." "That's us," Granger said. "Who's asking?" "Name's Pratt. I ride for the mine." He wiped his face. "You got to turn around. Bridge is out. The Ridge Bridge over the Dever Gorge, half of it come down 2 nights ago. There's no way across for a loaded wagon. Mine's already sent word down the other road for the powder to come the long way round through Bishop." He shook his head. "You can't make the 14th going round through Bishop. Nobody can. It's over. Contract's dead. I'm sorry to be the one, but I'd rather tell you here than let you drive 2 more days for nothing." Granger didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did Evelyn. Every driver in the line had gone still. "Half the bridge," Evelyn said finally. "Which half?" Pratt looked at her, then looked at Granger like he was asking permission to be confused. Granger just nodded at her answer her, and something in that nod said more than words about how things stood in this crew now. The east span," Pratt said. "The far side from you. The deck's gone about 40 feet out from the east abutment. West half's still standing, but it don't matter. There's a 40-foot gap of nothing over a 200-foot drop. You can't—" "2 nights ago," Evelyn cut in. "It just fell on its own. An old bridge sitting there 15 years just picked a Tuesday to drop half its deck." Pratt opened his mouth, closed it. "I don't know, ma'am," he said. "The timbers under the east span were burnt. That's what the mine boss said when he rode out to look. Burnt through. He figured lightning or some fool's campfire under the deck." He shrugged uneasily. "But there wasn't no storm 2 nights ago, and ain't nobody camps under the Ridge Bridge. It's 200 feet down to the rocks." Nobody said anything. Then Cole Maddox, sitting his wagon 3 back in the line, said very quietly, in a voice that carried in the still hot air, "Burnt." And Evelyn turned in her seat and looked at him, and Cole Maddox looked back at her, and both of them were thinking the same thing, and neither of them said it in front of the mine's rider. They sent Pratt on his way with a canteen and a lie. Granger told him they'd turn back for Bishop, and the moment the man was over the rise and gone, Granger swung down off his horse, and Evelyn came off her wagon, and Maddox came up the line, and the 3 of them stood in the road together, while the other drivers watched from a distance, sensing something had shifted. "Say it," Granger said. "Somebody burnt that bridge," Maddox said. "On purpose, to kill this contract. You don't know that. No storm, no campfire, burnt timbers on the one span that matters 2 nights before the deadline on the one route Cargill's powder had to take." Maddox spat in the dust. "I've hauled these roads my whole life, Wyatt. Bridges don't burn themselves the week they're needed. Somebody wants Cargill ruined. Somebody who knew our schedule." "Who?" Granger said flatly. "Who'd want it bad enough to burn a bridge and near kill a whole crew? Cargill's got no enemies. He's a broke old man with one contract." "That's exactly why," Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. "A broke old man with one contract that's about to be worth something," she said. "Think about it. Cargill signed the Dever Hall when the mine was small. Now the mine's bringing in machinery hiring, expanding that supply contract is going to be worth 10 times next year what it's worth now, and it renews to whoever holds it when it fills. Cargill holds it. If Cargill fills this haul, Cargill's set for a decade. If Cargill misses it, the contract's void, and it goes up for bid, and it goes to whoever's got wagons ready. She looked between them. Who's got wagons ready this territory? Who's big enough to swallow a mine contract? Cargill can't fill anymore. Silence. Dolan, Maddox said slowly. The Dolan freight line. Out of Bishop. His face changed. They run the Bishop Road, the long road, the only road left now that the Ridge Bridge is out. Evelyn nodded. So the bridge burns. Cargill's train can't get through. The contract goes void, and it just so happens the only outfit positioned to pick it up runs the one road that's still open. She let it sit. That's not luck, Mr. Maddox. That's a plan. And we walked our whole train right into the middle of it. Granger was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. Gone hard and cold, in a way Evelyn hadn't heard from him yet, the voice of a man who's just understood he's been played. If you're right, he said, then Dolan's men are watching that bridge. To make sure nobody fixes it. To make sure Cargill's train turns around like a good little dead contract and goes home. He looked up the road toward the gorge. And if we don't turn around, if we show up at that bridge trying to find a way across, they'll know we figured it out. And men who'll burn a bridge over a 200-foot drop to win a contract aren't going to stop at burning a bridge. Then we don't show up trying to find a way across? Evelyn said. There is no way across, Evelyn. 40-foot gap, 200 feet down. Even if I believed you about Dolan, and I'm starting to, it doesn't get us over that gorge. The contract's dead either way. Dolan wins either way. He dragged a hand down his face. I'll take the crew home. At least I'll take 'em home alive. There's another way across the Daver Gorge, Maddox said. Everyone looked at him. He didn't look happy to be saying it. There's an old crossing, upstream, where the gorge narrows before it opens out. The walls come in close, maybe 30 feet apart, and there's an old timber trestle from the first mine back in the 60s, the Miller's Cut Trestle. He shook his head slowly. But nobody's driven it in 20 years. It was condemned before I was hauling. It's single lane, no rail, rotten as an old tooth, hanging over a drop worse than the Ridge Bridge, and it was built for ore carts, not loaded freight wagons. You put a powder wagon on Miller's Cut, and it drops you into the gorge, sure as... Have you seen it? Evelyn asked. Lately, not in years. Then you don't know it's rotten. You know it was. She was already thinking, her eyes far off, the way they got. A timber trestle in dry mountain air doesn't rot the way you think. It checks and it grays, and it looks like death, but the heartwood can hold for 50 years if the water never sits on it. My father drove a condemned trestle in the Sierras every summer for 9 years, because he'd looked at it and knew it'd hold, and the county that condemned it never once had. A bridge isn't rotten because a man 20 years ago said so. It's rotten when you put your own 2 feet on it and feel it give. She looked at Maddox. How far to Miller's Cut? In half a day. Up the old ore road. He was staring at her. Evelyn, you can't be... It's condemned. It's over a drop that makes the Ridge Bridge look like a creek. It's single lane with no rail. And even if it holds, which it won't. Dolan's men are watching the Ridge Bridge, sure. But if they've got any sense, they've got a man on Miller's Cut too, because it's the only other way across, and they'll have thought of it same as I did. Then we'll deal with Dolan's man when we get there, Evelyn said. One problem at a time. First we go look at the bridge, with our own eyes and our own feet. If it's truly gone, we turn back and Dolan wins, and at least we tried. But I am not turning this train around on the word of a rider and a 20-year-old condemnation and handing a corrupt outfit a man's whole life without once going to look. She turned to Granger. This one's not a River Wyatt. This one's yours. You're the foreman. You say turn back, we turn back. But I'm telling you what I'd do if it were mine. I'd go look at Miller's Cut. Granger looked at the two of them, at the road home, safe and empty. At the road up to a condemned trestle over a killing drop with corrupt men maybe waiting at the end of it. "We go look," he said. "Just look. Nobody's committing to anything till we've seen it with our own eyes." They turned up the old ore road, and it was slow, cruel going, a track meant for carts, and not seen a wheel in a generation, and the whole way up, Evelyn felt the thing tightening in her chest that she'd felt on the far bank of the Salt Fork, the sense of a road saving its worst. Maddox rode up beside her partway. "The friend I didn't name," he said without preamble. "The other one, off this road." She waited. "He drove for Dolan," Maddox said. "Years back. Good man. Name of Silas. And he found out Dolan was watering the ore weights and cheating the mine, and he was gonna talk." He stared straight ahead. "And one day, Silas took a load out on a mountain road, and his brake shoe failed, and he went off a grade. And everybody said accident. And I helped bury him. And it was 6 years before I let myself understand that Dolan's men had cut that brake shoe halfway through so it'd hold on the flat and let go on the grade." His jaw was tight. "So don't tell me Dolan wouldn't burn a bridge, Evelyn. I've been not saying his name for 6 years because saying it out loud meant admitting I helped bury a murdered man and called it an accident. That's my other friend. That's the one I couldn't name." Evelyn drove in silence a moment. "Why tell me now?" she said quietly. "Because you stood in the Salt Fork for me," Maddox said. "And because if we're really driving up to a bridge Dolan burned, you deserve to know exactly what kind of men we're dealing with before you put your neck out over that gorge. They don't burn bridges to slow you down, ma'am. They burn 'em to kill you and call it weather. Silas taught me that. I just took 6 years to learn it." He touched his hat and dropped back down the line. "I owed you the truth. You've give me nothing but." They reached the Ridge Bridge by late afternoon, and it was exactly as bad as Pratt had said. The east span was gone, 40 feet of deck, simply not there. A raw gap over a drop that Evelyn made herself walk to the edge of and look down because she made herself look at everything, and what she saw was 200 feet of empty air and a river, like a thread at the bottom. And when she went down under the west abutment, where the standing timbers met the rock, she found what Pratt had described, and Maddox had feared. The great support beams charred black, burned clean through. The char fresh, no rain streaking on it, no weather. Somebody had stacked brush against the east piers and lit it, and stood back and watched an outfit's whole future fall 200 feet into a gorge. "It's exactly what you said," she told Granger, coming back up, her hands black with the char. "Burned. Deliberate. There's no arguing it. Somebody wanted this bridge down, and they didn't much care who was on it." Granger looked at the char on her hands, and his face went to stone. "Then Cole's right," he said. "About all of it. Dolan, Silas, the brake shoe." He looked out across the impossible gap. "We're not dealing with a rival freight line. We're dealing with men who murder and call it accidents. And I dragged this whole crew and you right up into the middle of it." He turned to her, and there was something raw in it. "I should have turned back at Pratt. I let you talk me up this road because I wanted the contract, because I've been broke and beholden to Cargill my whole life, and this haul was going to be the thing that—" He stopped. "I put you all in front of killers for money. That's the plain truth of it. Same as every foreman who ever hurried a man into deep water." "No," Evelyn said sharply, and it surprised him. "No, don't you do that. Don't you dress it up as your sin so you can turn us all around and feel noble about it." She stepped close to him, char-black hands and all. "You didn't hurry anybody into water. You came up here to look the exact opposite of what a man does who's careless with lives. And the difference between you and the man who hurried my Tom is that Tom's man wanted him to go fast over a bad crossing, and you, Wyatt Granger, have never once in this whole run told me to go faster. Not once. Every hard place you gave me the reins and let me go slow. That's not a man who kills people for money. That's the only kind of man I'd follow up a mountain at all." She held his eyes. "Now, do we go look at Miller's Cut, or do we hand a murderer a dead man's contract and go home?" Granger looked at her for a long moment, and something settled in him. "We go look," he said. Miller's Cut was another 2 hours up, where the gorge pinched down to a narrow throat, and the trestle hung across it exactly as terrible as Maddox had promised, a spindly timber skeleton gray as bone, single lane. No rail spanning maybe 30 feet of gap over a drop that made the stomach lurch just to stand near. And there was a man there. He was sitting his horse on the far side of the trestle in the shade, and he stood up in his stirrups when he saw the train come up the ore road, and Evelyn saw Maddox's hand drift toward the rifle in his wagon boot. "Easy," Granger murmured. "Everybody easy." The man walked his horse out onto the far end of the trestle, showing he trusted it, or wanting them to think he did, and stopped and called across the gap. "That's far enough. This crossing's condemned county business up here. This road's closed." He was young, hard-faced, and his rifle was already across his saddle. "You'll want to turn that train around and go back the way you come." "County man, are you?" Granger called back. "That's right." "Funny," Granger said. "Because I know the county surveyor for this district personal, and he's a fat man of 60 named Harlow, and you ain't him, and you ain't got a county badge or a county paper on you that I can see. You're a Dolan man." He said it flat and easy. "You've been sitting up here 2 days, making sure nobody crosses at Miller's Cut, while your friends burn the Ridge Bridge. Ain't that about the size of it?" The man's face didn't change, but his hand did. It settled on the rifle. And that was the moment Evelyn Hart understood with a cold and total clarity that they were not going to be allowed to simply turn around. That a man who'd sat 2 days guarding a bridge would not now let 3 witnesses ride back down the mountain to talk about burned timbers and dead brake shoes and a murdered man named Silas. "He's not going to let us leave," she said quietly to Granger, not moving her lips much. "Whatever we decide, he's seen our faces at a burned bridge. We know too much now to just ride home." "I know," Granger said just as quietly. "I clocked it too." What happened next happened fast, and Evelyn was the only one calm. The Dolan man raised his rifle, not all the way, just enough the lazy threat of a man who'd done this before and expected it to work, and he said, "Last time, turn around." And Maddox, 6 years of a buried friend boiling up in him, grabbed for his own rifle. "Cole don't!" Granger barked. But Evelyn was already moving, and she didn't move toward a gun. She dropped off her wagon on the blind side out of the Dolan man's sight, and she came around the front of her team fast and low, and she did the one thing nobody, not the killer on the far bank, not Granger, not Maddox, was expecting. She unhitched her gray leader from the team, swung up onto its bare back with the ease of a woman raised in barns, and she rode it straight out onto the condemned trestle. Toward the gunman, onto the thing everyone swore would drop her. "Evelyn?" Granger's voice cracked in a way she'd never heard from him. She didn't stop. She rode out onto Miller's Cut on a bareback mule, over a 200-foot drop straight at an armed man. And the gunman's rifle came up all the way now on her. But his horse felt the trestle shift under the mule's weight and started to sidestep and fret. And a man can't hold a bead on a moving target from the back of a spooking horse, over a killing drop, and Evelyn Hart had known that, had counted on it, had read that man's horse from 40 feet the same way she read everything. "You want to shoot somebody? Shoot me?" she called out, riding straight at him, her voice ringing off the gorge walls, utterly level. "But your horse doesn't like this bridge any better than you do. And you've got about 3 seconds before it backs itself off the edge. And if you're aiming at me, you're not minding your horse. So you go ahead and choose, mister. Kill the woman or keep your seat. You can't do both. I've got nothing but time up here. I already died once 4 years back, in a river. This is all just extra." The gunman's horse reared. He grabbed for the reins, had to or die, and in that instant, his rifle swung wide, and Maddox's shot took the weapon clean out of his hands and spun it off into the gorge, and the Dolan man was left on a panicking horse on the end of a condemned trestle over a 200-foot drop with no gun and a woman on a mule bearing straight down on him. "Get off the bridge," Evelyn told him, riding him down, backing his horse toward the far side inch by inch. "Get off it before your horse puts you both in the gorge. Go on. Back, back." She herded him off the far end onto solid ground, and the moment his horse's hind feet hit rock, The animal bolted and carried its cursing disarmed rider away down the far road at a dead run gone. And Evelyn Hart sat alone on a bareback mule in the dead center of the condemned Miller's Cut trestle over the drop, and felt the old gray timbers under her, and did the thing she'd come out there to do all along. She read the bridge. She sat dead still and felt it through the mule's feet. She listened to it. She walked the gray forward a few steps and back, feeling for the sponge the 6 soft flecks of true rot. And she found the timbers gray and checked and ugly as sin, and under the ugliness hard. Dry country hard. Heartwood sound. Exactly as her father had taught her a condemned trestle could be if the water never sat on it, and up here in the high, dry air, the water never had. She rode the gray back across to her own side, slow feeling every plank, and she swung down and her legs held her barely, and she looked at Granger and Maddox, who were both staring at her like she'd come back from the dead. "It'll hold," she said. Evelyn Granger got out. "It's checked and it is ugly, and it looks like it'll drop a bird," she said, "and it is sound. The heartwood never rotted. The county condemned the look of it 20 years ago, and never once walked out to feel it. I felt it, on foot and on the mule. It'll carry a loaded wagon one at a time, dead slow, dead center, no rail and no room for error over a drop that'll kill you the instant you stop being perfect." She was shaking, and she let them see it now because she'd earned it. "It'll hold. But it is the worst thing I have ever asked a team to cross, and I have crossed the Salt Fork with powder. So I'm not going to lie to you and say it's safe. It's not safe. It's just possible. And possible is more than Dolan thinks we've got." Granger looked out of the trestle and back at her, and the enormity of it sat on all 3 of them. "You just rode a condemned bridge at a man with a rifle," he said, "to find out if it was safe enough to cross." His voice was strange. "You put yourself over that drop in front of a gun to test the timbers. I put myself over the drop because he'd have shot one of you if I hadn't given him something crazier to look at," Evelyn said. "The bridge testing came free with it, same as Maddox's life came free with his load on the grade." A small, exhausted, almost smile. "I've got a habit of doing 2 things at once up here. Seems to be the only way this road lets a body do anything at all." But the far side now was a problem, because the Dolan man had bolted down the far road, the road to the mine, and a man that scared and that angry was going to ride straight to whoever gave him his orders and tell them Cargill's train had found the burned bridge, killed nothing, seen everything, and was sitting at Miller's Cut with a way across. "He'll bring the rest of them," Maddox said grimly. "However many Dolans got up here. They'll come to stop us at the cut, and this time they won't sit and threaten. They'll know we know. Silas the bridge, all of it." He looked at the trestle. "And we've got 1 bridge 1 wagon wide that takes a dead slow crossing. They catch us mid-span with a wagon on that trestle, and they don't even need guns. They just wait at the far end and pick us off one at a time as we come across. It's a killing bottleneck. It's the worst place on earth to be caught." "You says, Ulsa Ulshi." "Then we don't get caught mid-span," Evelyn said. "We cross tonight, now, before he can bring anybody back." She was already moving toward her team. "How far's the mine from the far end of the cut?" 4 hours hard driving." "And how long before that man reaches Dolan's people and gets them back up here?" Maddox did the math and his face changed. "If Dolan's camp is where I think 6 hours, maybe 5, then we have an hour, maybe 2 of margin." Evelyn said, "If we start across right now, 1 wagon at a time, dead slow in the dark, over a 200-foot drop, before armed men who murder for a living come back to hold the far end against us." She turned and looked at both men, and she was still shaking, and her voice did not shake at all. "So, here's where we are, and I'll say it plain because you've both said things plain to me. Behind us is a burned bridge and a dead contract and a corrupt outfit that just tried to kill us and will try again. In front of us is a condemned trestle I have felt with my own 2 feet, and believe will hold over a drop that will kill any of us the instant we're less than perfect, with maybe an hour before killers come back to trap us on it. There is no safe choice left. Dolan took the safe choice away when he burned that bridge. There is only the least deadly one." She looked at Granger. "You're the foreman. It's your crew and your call. But I have read that bridge, and I have read that river, and I have read every foot of this road you gave me, and I am telling you, the least deadly thing left on this whole mountain is to cross Miller's Cut tonight in the dark before they come back. And I will drive the first wagon over myself so no man crosses a bridge I haven't proved with my own load first." Granger looked at her. Then he looked at the condemned trestle gray and awful in the failing light hanging over the killing drop, the only road left to a dead man's contract and a burned man's justice, both. And Wyatt Granger, foreman of Coldwater, who had spent 19 years never once ordering a driver over a bridge. He wouldn't cross himself, took off his hat, and turned to his crew coming up the ore road behind them and raised his voice so every one of them could hear. "Listen up," he called. "Every man of you, because I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not going to order you, and I'm not going to dress up one word of what I'm about to say." The drivers gathered. The gorge went quiet under them, 200 feet of dark air, waiting below the bones of the bridge, and somewhere down the far road, a disarmed killer was riding hard toward men who would come back to finish what the fire had started. And Evelyn Hart climbed back up onto her powder wagon, and gathered her reins in her ruined hands, and turned her scarred gray leader toward the condemned trestle, and waited for the word. "Here's the truth," Granger told his crew hat in his hand. "Dolan burned the Ridge Bridge to kill this contract and take it for himself. One of his men just tried to hold us off this crossing at gunpoint, and Miss Hart ran him off, and he's riding for reinforcements right now. In front of us is a condemned trestle. Miss Hart's walked it and felt it and says it'll hold. And I've watched that woman read a river and a grade and a bridge for 4 days now, and never once be wrong, so I believe her. But it's one wagon wide, no rail over a 200-foot drop in the dark, with killers maybe an hour behind us." He looked at each man in turn. "I won't order any man across that. You want to unhitch and ride home free? Do it now, no shame, and I'll shake your hand at the bottom. But I'm going over, and she's going first." Nobody moved toward the horses. An old driver named Boyd spat and said, "All hell, Granger, woman's been saving our necks since Coldwater. I ain't about to let her drive off a cliff without me behind her." And that was the whole of the vote. Not one man peeled off. They just started quietly checking their chains. Evelyn heard it from the wagon seat and had to look hard at her mule's ears a moment before she trusted her face. "You don't have to go first," Granger said, coming up to her wheel. "I can send an empty wagon over to prove it." "An empty wagon proves nothing about a loaded one," Evelyn said. "The whole question is whether it holds weight. Mine's the heaviest load on the train. If Miller's Cut carries my powder, it carries anything. So mine goes first, or the test means nothing." She gathered her lines. "Walk out ahead of me on foot, Wyatt, to the far side. Not to catch me. Nobody's catching 1,200 pounds if it goes. I want you out there, so I've got a face to drive toward in the dark instead of a drop. Same as I was a mark for the men in the Salt Fork. Be my mark." Granger looked up at her. "You want me on the far side," he said slowly, "so that if the bridge drops, I have to stand there and watch it take you. The way you watched the river take Tom. The way Cole watched it take his father." His jaw tightened. "You're asking me to stand on a bank again." Evelyn went still. She hadn't thought of it that way. But he was right, and they both knew he was right, and the knowing of it hung between them in the dark. "Yes?" she said, finally quiet. "I reckon I am. I'm asking you to stand on the far bank and trust that I read the water right, and not be able to do one thing but watch." She held his eyes. "That's the hardest thing there is, Wyatt. I know it better than anybody living. And I'm asking you to do it anyway because I can't drive toward nothing. I need a reason on the far side. Will you be it?" For a long moment, Wyatt Granger didn't answer. Then he put his hat back on and pulled it low and said in a voice gone rough, "I'll be on the far side. And you read that water right? Evelyn Hart, you hear me? You read it right and you come across. Because I have stood on exactly one riverbank in my life that mattered. And I am not going to spend the rest of it standing on this one, wishing I'd said—" He stopped himself hard, turned. "Just come across. and he walked out onto the condemned trestle alone in the dark, over the drop to the far side, to be her mark. He never finished the sentence. Evelyn drove the whole crossing with the unfinished half of it ringing in her chest, louder than the timbers. She took Miller's Cut a plank at a time. There is no describing what it costs a person to drive 1,200 pounds of black powder across a condemned trestle in the dark over a drop that ends on rocks, and Evelyn didn't try. She just did it the only way she knew. Slow and dead center and talking low to the gray the whole way. Easy, easy, you feel that's solid, that's good ground, keep coming. And she fixed her eyes on the dark shape of Wyatt Granger standing at the far end, and she drove toward him, and nothing else. Not the drop, not the dark, not the 4 years, not the killers behind. Just the man on the far bank, who'd promised to stand there and watch and trust, and not be able to do a thing. The trestle groaned under the load. Once near the center, a plank cracked like a pistol shot, and every soul on both sides stopped breathing, but it was just a surface check, splitting the heartwood underneath, holding sound exactly as she'd said, and she didn't flinch, didn't stop, didn't hurry. And the gray felt her not flinch, and kept coming, and the wagon rolled on. She came off the far end of Miller's Cut, with 40 barrels of powder intact, and she set her brake, and she sat there in the dark, and Wyatt Granger walked up to her wheel and put his hand on it, and neither of them said one word, because there wasn't one big enough. Then she straightened her back and called across the gorge, steady as anything. It holds one at a time, dead slow, dead center. Come across Boyd, you're next, and you drive toward Mr. Granger's lantern, not the drop. And one at a time in the dark, over the killing gap, Wyatt Granger stood at the far end, and was the mark, and every wagon of Hank Cargill's train crossed the condemned trestle that a corrupt outfit had gambled would stop them, because a woman the whole territory had turned away had put her own 2 feet on it and known the truth that the county never bothered to learn. The last wagon came over as the moon rose, and down the far road, faint but growing, came the sound of riders. "That's them," Maddox said. "Coming back, with friends by the sound." He was already pulling his rifle. "How many you figure? 6 horses, 8. "Doesn't matter how many," Granger said. "We can't outrun 'em with loaded wagons, and we can't fight 8 armed men across open ground. Not and keep the load." He looked at the trestle behind them. "But they've got to cross Miller's Cut to reach us. Same as we did. 1 wagon wide, 1 horse wide." Evelyn's head came up. "One at a time," she said. "One at a time." Granger agreed, and something cold and certain settled into his voice. "That bridge is a bottleneck that near killed us. Well, now it's between us and them. They come at us, they come 1 rider at a time, across a condemned trestle in the dark, over a drop, with us on the solid far end. That's not a fight. That's a turkey shoot, and we're holding the good end of it." "We don't shoot anybody," Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. "We don't have to," she said. "Think. What's the one thing those men are absolutely certain of? That the bridge is condemned, that it won't hold. Dolan's whole plan was built on nobody being fool enough to cross Miller's Cut. They don't know we crossed it loaded. They can't imagine it. So when they come up that far road and find our tracks leading onto a condemned trestle," she was already moving, thinking fast, "they'll believe one of 2 things. Either we were mad enough to try it and dropped into the gorge and did their work for them, or we somehow got across, which means the bridge holds, which means they have to cross it too, in the dark, to come after us. And they will not do that. Men who murder for money don't die for it. Not one of them is going to be the first rider out onto a condemned bridge in the dark to chase a load of powder. They'll sit on the far side and argue and wait for daylight." She looked at Granger. "And by daylight, we're at the mine, and the powder's delivered, and the contract's filled, and there's not one thing left for them to stop." "Was said." Granger stared at her. "You want to just drive away," he said, "and let the bridge do the fighting. I want to be 4 hours gone before they work up the nerve to test the thing we already know holds." Evelyn said. "Let them sit on that far bank all night calling each other cowards. Every hour they waste being afraid of a bridge is an hour closer we are to the mine. We don't need to win a gunfight, Wyatt. We just need to be gone. We've already won the only thing that matters. We're on this side, and they're on that one. And the only road between is a bridge. They're too smart and too paid to cross in the dark.
Tamalha.
She was right. They rolled the train hard for the mine, and behind them, the riders reached Miller's Cut and found the tracks leading out onto the condemned trestle, and did exactly what Evelyn had said they'd do. They stopped. From a mile on, over the sound of their own wheels, the crew could hear them shouting across the gorge, arguing a shot fired into the dark more from fury than hope. But not one horse came out onto Miller's Cut. Not one man among them would be the first to trust his life to the thing they'd all sworn would kill anyone who tried. The bridge they'd counted on to stop Cargill's train stopped Dolan's men instead. "They're not coming," Boyd called back, grinning in the dark. "They're just yelling. Whole pack of 'em yelling at a bridge." "Let 'em yell," Granger said. "Drive." They drove, and in the long dark hours down the far road toward the Deaver mine, with the danger finally behind them and the load finally near safe, something in the crew unwound. Men who'd been strangers to Evelyn 4 days ago in a cold water yard rode close to her wagon now and talked low and easy, the way men talk when they've come through a thing together. Boyd told a story about a mule that ate a hat. Somebody laughed. The gray leader plodded on sound and steady, the scar on its muzzle silver in the moonlight. Maddox brought his wagon up alongside hers for a stretch. "When we get down there," he said, "and the powder's delivered, and Cargill's contracts saved, there's still Dolan, the bridge, the burning Silas, all of it. That doesn't just go away because we made the delivery. Dolan tried to murder a whole crew tonight. He murdered Silas 6 years ago. Men like that don't stop because they lost one contract." "I know," Evelyn said. "So what do we do about it?" "We do the thing your Silas was trying to do when they killed him," Evelyn said. "We tell it, all of it, to the one man in this territory Dolan can't buy or burn." She looked at him. "There's a federal marshal comes through the mine district for the payroll shipments, and there's a circuit judge sits at the county seat come the assizes. And there's 40 barrels of powder about to be delivered by a crew that saw a burned bridge with their own eyes, and a foreman who'll swear to it, and a driver Dolan's man pointed a rifle at. And you, Cole, you who can finally say the name you couldn't say for 6 years in front of a judge under oath." She held his gaze. "Silas died trying to talk and never got to. You're still alive. You get to finish what he started. That's not vengeance. That's just the thing he'd have done for you." Maddox was quiet a long moment. 6 years, he said, his voice thick. 6 years, I called it an accident so I wouldn't have to be the man who let it slide. And you show up out of nowhere, and in 4 days you've got me ready to stand up in a courthouse and say his name. He shook his head. "How do you do that? How do you just make a person able to do the thing they couldn't do?" "I don't do anything," Evelyn said gently. "You were always able. You just needed somebody to stand on the bank with you." She looked out at the road. "That's all any of us ever needed. Somebody on the far bank who read the water right and didn't turn away." They came down out of the mountains near dawn, and the Dever mine works spread out below them in the gray light, and the crew let out a ragged cheer that 4 days on a killing road had earned them 10 times over. And then a rider came out to meet them from the mine, and Evelyn's hand tightened on the reins, because after Pratt, she trusted no rider coming fast, but this one was different. Older, a silver badge on his coat that caught the dawn. "That's the marshal," Maddox breathed. "Evelyn, that's the federal marshal, his own self come out to meet us." He rode up and reined in and looked over the train, the mud, the char, the exhausted men, the woman on the powder wagon with her hands wrapped in bloody rags. "You'd be Cargill's train," he said. "The Deaver powder." "We would," Granger said, wary. "Something wrong. Mine sent a man down 2 days back to turn you around," the marshal said. "Told you the bridge was out and the contract was dead. Told you to give it up and go home." He looked at them steadily. "And here you are. which means either that man lied to you, or you didn't believe him, or you found another way across a gorge that ain't got another way across." He leaned on his saddle horn. "So I'll ask it plain, because I rode out here special when the mine boss told me his powder train turned around and then didn't. How'd you get here?" And Wyatt Granger looked at Evelyn, and Evelyn looked at Maddox and Cole Maddox, who had buried a murdered friend and called it an accident for 6 years, took a breath, and finally said the name. "Marshall," he said, "there's a bridge burned back there. Burned on purpose. And a man named Dolan behind it. And I've got 6 years of things to tell you, starting with a driver named Silas that everybody called an accident. And every man on this train saw the char with his own eyes, and this woman here had a rifle pointed at her at Miller's Cut by a Dolan man, and we can take you to every foot of it." His voice didn't shake. "It's a long story, Marshall, but I've been not telling it for 6 years, and I'm done not telling it. You got time to hear the whole thing." The marshal looked at him a long moment, then at the burned char still black on Evelyn's hands, then at the impossible fact of a loaded powder train that had crossed a gorge with no bridge. "Son," he said quietly, "I've got all the time in the world. Deliver your powder. Then you tell me every word." They delivered the powder as the sun came up over the Deaver. Cut 40 barrels intact one day early, and the mine boss came out and counted them twice, like a man who couldn't believe his own eyes, and the contract was filled, and Hank Cargill's yard was saved, and none of it. Not one barrel would have crossed those mountains without the woman. The whole territory had turned away at the gate. But that wasn't the moment that undid her. The moment that undid her came after, when the crew was standing in the mine yard in the early light, filthy and spent and alive. And Wyatt Granger walked over to where she sat on the tailgate of her empty wagon, trying to unwind the bloody rags from her ruined hands. And he crouched down in front of her and took her hands in his, without a word, and started unwinding the rags himself. Careful, gentle. A hard man's hands doing a gentle thing. "You'll want these looked at," he said low. "You drove 3 days on torn-up hands and never said a word." There wasn't anything to say. There's always something to say. You just don't say it. He worked the last of the rag loose and looked at the raw wreck of her palms, and his jaw tightened. "You did this in the Coldwater yard. First hour I ever saw you. Caught a bolting mule barehanded and tore your hands open and drove a killing road for 4 days and never once let me see them hurt." He looked up at her. "Why?" "Because a woman who lets them see it hurt is a woman they send home," Evelyn said. "I learned that a long time before you, Wyatt. You show them one wince and they've got their reason. So you don't wince. You never wince. 4 years I never let a single soul see me." And there her voice, which had not broken on the riverbank or the grade or the burned bridge or the condemned trestle over the killing drop, finally quietly broke. 4 years I never let anybody see me hurt, because the one time I did on that bank, screaming at Tom to wait, it didn't save him. Hurting out loud didn't save him. So I stopped. I just stopped, and I drove, and I got better than the river, and I never let anybody. She couldn't finish. And Wyatt Granger, foreman of Coldwater, hard and unhurried and careful, still holding her ruined hands in his, said the thing he'd been not saying since the middle of a condemned bridge in the dark. "I stood on the far bank for you," he said, "last night, on the far side of the drop in the dark, and I watched you drive 1,200 pounds of powder toward me, plank by plank, and I could not do one single thing but stand there and trust you'd read it right. And it was the worst thing I have ever done in my life. Worse than any road. Standing there, unable to help, just watching and trusting and praying." His voice was rough as gravel, and I understood. "Right about the middle of the bridge what you've been carrying for 4 years. What it costs to stand on a bank and watch and not be able to help. And I thought, if I have to stand on a bank for this woman again, I want it to be as the man who's allowed to. Not a foreman watching a driver. Not a stranger." He tightened his hands on hers, careful of the wounds. "You made me your mark on that bridge. Well, I'd like to be your mark on more than a bridge, Evelyn Hart, for however long a road you've got left. If you'll have a hard old cowboy who took 4 days to say it, and near said it in the worst possible place 3 times. Evelyn Hart looked at him. And the woman who had not let a single soul see her hurt in 4 years, let this one man see all of it. The whole 4 years. The river, the bank, the healing, the road. And she did not wipe her eyes, and she did not level her voice, and she did not flinch. "I don't need a Mark Wyatt," she said, and her voice shook, and she let it. "I read my own water fine. I've read it alone for 4 years." She turned her ruined hands over in his, so they were holding him back now, torn palms and all. "But I have been so tired of reading it alone, and a man who will stand on the far bank and trust me to read it right and not turn away and not tell me to hurry." Her voice cracked clean through. "That's not a Mark. That's the thing I stopped letting myself want on a riverbank 4 years ago, because wanting it hurt worse than not. And you just walked out onto a condemned bridge in the dark and handed it back to me like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Granger said. "No," Evelyn whispered. "It wasn't." And the crew of Cargill's train, standing filthy and exhausted in the Deaver mine yard in the first full light of morning, watched their foreman and their lead driver hold each other's ruined hands on the tailgate of an empty powder wagon, and not one of them said a word. And old Boyd took off his hat, and Cole Maddox looked at the two of them, and thought of Silas, and of a river, and of 6 years of silence finally ending, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Maddox smiled all the way to his eyes. But it wasn't over. Because down in the mine office, the marshal was waiting to hear a 6-year-old story about a burned bridge and a murdered man, and 100 miles back down the mountain in a freight yard. In Bishop, a man named Dolan did not yet know that his bridge had failed to kill anybody, that his gunman had come back disarmed and raving, that a woman he'd never heard of had crossed a gorge. He'd bet a contract nobody could cross, and that a driver he'd murdered 6 years ago was about to speak at last, through the mouth of the man who'd helped bury him. Cole Maddox told the whole of it in the mine office, and it took 2 hours, and he did not leave out one word. He told the marshal about Silas, the good man who'd found out Dolan was watering the ore weights and cheating the mine, and who'd meant to talk, and whose brake shoe had been cut halfway through, so it would hold on the flat and let go on the grade. He told about the funeral, and the 6 years of calling it an accident, because saying otherwise meant admitting he'd helped bury a murdered man. He told about the burned bridge, and the char with no rain streaks, and the gunman at Miller's Cut, and every man on the train swore to what he'd seen. And when Maddox was done, his voice was steady, and his eyes were dry, and he sat back and said, "I've owed Silas that for 6 years, Marshal. I'm sorry it took me this long, but it's said now, all of it. And I'll say every word again in front of a judge and Dolan both." The marshal wrote it all down, and when he set down his pen, he looked at Cole Maddox for a long moment. "Son," he said, "I've been trying to put something on Dolan for 4 years. Watered weights missing drivers, contracts that fell to him a little too clean. I had a feel for it, and not one soul who'd swear. You just handed me the whole thing." He stood. "The burned bridge is federal. It's a mine supply route. Government powder, that's my jurisdiction clean. I'll have riders on Dolan's yard in Bishop before the char's cold. And that gunman of his that Miss Hart ran off the trestle, a scared man who's just been made a fool of, will trade his boss for his own neck faster than you can spit. I'll have him talking by nightfall." He picked up his hat. "You didn't just save a contract, the lot of you. You broke a man who's been murdering his way to the top of this territory for a decade. And you did it by delivering 40 barrels of powder over a gorge he swore couldn't be crossed." He put his hat on and looked at Evelyn last of all. "They tell me you read the bridge," he said. "Walked out on a condemned trestle over a 200-foot drop at a man with a rifle and felt the timbers with your own feet and knew it'd hold when 20 years of county papers said it wouldn't." "I did," Evelyn said. "How'd you know it'd hold when the county didn't?" "Because the county read the paper," Evelyn said, "and I read the wood." The marshal looked at her a long moment, and then he did a thing he did not do lightly, being a federal officer of some years and small patience for showmanship. He took off his hat again to a woman in a mine office, and he said, "Ma'am, in 30 years of this work, I have met exactly a handful of people I'd trust to read a thing straight when every paper in the world said different. My compliments. The territory's better for you being in it." And he went out to break Dolan. They broke him inside the week. The gunman traded everything the moment the marshal's riders put him in irons exactly as predicted, and Dolan's yard foreman traded the rest to save himself and the watered weights and the burned bridge. And at the last, the cut brake shoe that had killed a driver named Silas, 6 years gone. All of it came out in a county courthouse before a circuit judge with Cole Maddox standing up under oath and saying every word he'd swallowed for 6 years. Dolan sat through the whole of it going grayer by the hour, a big man watching a decade of murder and fraud come apart in a hot courtroom. And when the judge read the verdict, Dolan did not rage or run. He just seemed to fold the way a burned bridge folds all at once, at the one weak place after years of looking solid. He got 20 years. For the fraud and the bridge, and most of all, for a driver named Silas, whose name was finally spoken in a place where it counted. And Cole Maddox stood on the courthouse steps afterward in the hard summer light, and he was quiet a long while. And then he said to nobody, or to Silas, or to the 6 years themselves, "It's done. I told it. I finally told it." And something went out of his shoulders that had been sitting there so long, he'd forgotten it was a weight at all. Evelyn came and stood beside him. "He'd have been proud of you," she said. "He'd have said I was slow," Maddox said and laughed wet-eyed. 6 years slow, but he'd have been proud. He wiped his face and looked at her. "You know what you did, Evelyn? You didn't just get me to say his name. You showed the whole territory a thing they'd all agreed to forget, that the road doesn't care who's driving. That a woman they turned away at every gate read a bridge better than the county drove a load nobody else would touch and broke a murderer doing it." He shook his head. "They're going to tell this story out here for 50 years, and in every telling, the driver's a woman. You changed the story, ma'am, not just yours, all of ours." There was a reckoning back in Coldwater, too. Hank Cargill met the train when it rolled home. The same yard, the same fence rail Evelyn had stood at for 3 hours in the dust. The same men who jumped that rail when the mule bolted, and Cargill stood there and watched his whole saved future roll in through the gate. And he was not a man built for speeches, but he made one anyway. 4 days ago, Cargill said, standing on the office porch where Granger had first laughed at her, "I told this woman she'd be driving the last thing I owned up a road that kills people. I told her if she wrecked my load, I was ruined." He took his hat off an old man's hands, turning it. "Well, she didn't wreck it. She drove it over a gorge that had no bridge past men who tried to kill her and delivered it a day early. She saved this yard. She saved every wage every man here draws. And she did it with hands she'd torn open in this very yard the first hour I met her, and never once complained." He looked at her. "I hired you provisional Miss Hart. I'm ashamed of the word now. There was nothing provisional about a single thing you did." He came down off the porch and in front of the whole yard. The yard that had gone silent. When a woman first walked into it, Hank Cargill offered Evelyn Hart not a driver's wage, but a share. A partner's share. Her name on the Coldwater freight line beside his own. "Not as a driver," Cargill said. "As a partner. Because I'd be a fool to run this line without the best road reader in the territory, and a bigger fool to call her anything less than what she is." He put out his hand. "Will you take it, ma'am?" And Evelyn Hart looked at the hand and the yard and the fence rail where she'd waited in the dust to be told no one more time. And she thought of every gate that had turned her away, every man who'd dressed up no to look like for your own good. Every year she'd spent becoming better than a river that had taken everything. "I'll take it," she said, "on one condition." She looked around the yard. "This line hires the best driver for the job. Man or woman. Every time. No gate, no rail, no provisional. Anybody walks in here who can read a road, they get a seat same as I got one, except they won't have to catch a bolting mule barehanded to earn the look. That's my condition, Mr. Cargill. Put it in writing beside my name." Cargill looked at her, And then for the first time since the train had rolled home, the old man smiled. "Miss Hart," he said, "I'll carve it over the gate." But the moment that mattered most did not happen in a courthouse or a mine office or a freight yard full of men. It happened at dusk weeks later, when the worst of it was long behind them, and the char was washed off her hands, and the wounds had closed to pale scars across her palms. Scars she'd carry the rest of her life, the marks of a bolting mule in a cold water yard on the first day of everything. Wyatt Granger found her out by the third barn, where she'd gone the way she still went most evenings to sit with the scarred gray leader that nobody else in the yard had wanted to drive. He came and leaned on the rail beside her, unhurried as ever, and for a while neither of them said anything. The gray lipped at Evelyn's sleeve. Down the valley the summer light went long and gold. "You still come out here every evening," Granger said, "to this one mule." "He and I have an understanding," Evelyn said. "Everybody said no to both of us. And we drove up a road that kills people, and we lived, and we made every last one of them wrong." She scratched the gray's scarred muzzle. "I told him that the first night in this barn before the run. I promised him we'd be all right, him and me. I keep my promises." "I know you do," Granger said. "I've watched you keep every one you made since Coldwater, even the hard ones, even the ones that near killed you." He turned to face her, and the old careful stillness was in him, but under it now was something that had stopped being careful. "You made me a promise too that day on the tailgate, not in words. But you turned your hands over and held mine back, torn palms and all, and I've been holding you to it every day since, whether you meant it as a promise or not." "I meant it," Evelyn said quietly. "Then I've got one to make you back," Granger said. "And I want to make it right, not in the middle of a bridge over a killing drop, not with the whole crew watching, not at the worst possible moment, like a fool cowboy who can't find his words." He took off his hat. He was not a man who did things quickly, and he did not do this quickly either. 4 years you stood on a bank alone and read your own water and turned nobody's hand away because there was no hand to turn. Well, here's mine, Evelyn Hart. For every river and every grade and every condemned bridge and every long, dull mile in between. I'll stand on your far bank the rest of my life, and I'll trust you to read the water, and I will never once, not one single time, tell you to hurry across. His voice went rough. "Marry me, and let me be the man who's allowed to stand on the bank. Not a foreman, not a stranger. Your husband, yours." Evelyn Hart looked at this hard, unhurried, careful man who had walked out onto a condemned bridge in the dark to be her mark, who had kept every promise he'd made her since Coldwater, who had learned in the middle of a killing crossing exactly what she'd carried alone for 4 years and had never once flinched from it since. And she did not level her voice, and she did not hide her face, and she did not pretend it cost her nothing. "Wyatt Granger," she said, "I stood on a riverbank 4 years ago and swore I'd never let myself want this again because wanting it and losing it near killed me worse than the losing." She reached out and took his hand, both of hers around it, the pale scars of the Coldwater mule bright in the gold light. "And then a man I never met handed me the reins in a yard full of people telling me no, and trusted me over a bridge nobody trusted, and stood on my far bank and didn't turn away." Her voice shook, and she let it because she'd earned the right to let it. "So yes, yes, I'll marry you. And I'll read the water and you stand on the bank, and neither one of us will ever drive alone again. That's the whole of it. That's everything I stopped letting myself want, and you walked right up and handed it back." And Wyatt Granger, who had not smiled all the way through in 19 hard years, smiled all the way through then, and he pulled Evelyn Hart in against him, careful of her scarred hands, there beside the barn in the long summer dusk, with the ruined gray mule dozing at their shoulders, and the whole saved yard settling into evening behind them. They were married before the leaves turned in the Coldwater yard, under the gate where Cargill had, true to his word, carved the words deep into the crossbeam, so every driver who ever rolled through would read them. "The best hand drives, man or woman, every mile." Cole Maddox stood up beside Granger as his witness, and cried without shame, and thought of Silas, and knew he'd been forgiven. Old Boyd gave the bride away because she had no father living, and because he'd sworn back on the mountain he wouldn't let her drive off a cliff without him behind her, and he figured this counted. And Evelyn Hart Granger drove freight for the Coldwater Line for 30 years after the best road reader the territory ever knew, and she trained up every driver who came through that gate the way her father had trained her by teaching them to read the wood and not the paper, the water and not the fear. Some of them were men. A good many of them were women who'd been turned away at every other gate in the West, and walked through the one in Coldwater because they'd heard there was a place out there run by a woman who'd crossed a gorge that had no bridge, where the only question they'd ever ask you was whether you could read a road. She never once told any of them to hurry, and on the far bank of every river she ever crossed the rest of her life in fair weather. And in flood there stood a hard, unhurried, careful cowboy who had learned to trust her reading of the water over any paper in the world, who never turned away and never flinched, and stood his ground on that bank through 30 years of crossings, until they were both old, and their hands were both scarred, and the road behind them was long and good, and driven together every mile of the way. Because in the end, it was never about being the first woman to drive that road, or the best, or proving one single thing to anyone who'd ever said no. It was about a woman who'd learned to read the water alone, and a man who learned to stand on her bank and trust her. And the plain, hard-won truth that the two of them proved together on a killing road one deadly summer, and lived by every day of the 30 years that followed, that the road has never once cared who holds the reins, and the only thing that was ever real out there, the only thing that ever mattered, was whether you had the courage to read the water true, and the far greater courage to let someone stand beside you while you did.